episode 2 of the Dark Cellar Podcast. Uh, Podcast about paranormal, true crime, serial killers, and everything else in between. I'm your host, Dean, and thank you very much for joining me. This is your first time, welcome. If you listened to the first episode, welcome back. I'm glad you're here. So, I've always found interesting to read about serial killers. Just a morbid curiosity about what makes them tick. And, a lot of them are always around the same age, younger or middle age. But I found a story to share with you. It's about Ray and Faye Copeland from Missouri in the late 80s. They ended up becoming known as the oldest serial killing couple. Basically, in their retirement years, they went from loving grandparents to serial killers. I don't know about you, but when I retire, I don't necessarily plan on killing people. I plan on doing probably the total opposite. I don't even know what I'll do. Maybe I don't know, travel more or whatever. But killing people probably will not be anywhere on my list of things to do. I'll just look forward to not going to work. So this couple, Ray and Faye, it's confirmed that they've killed at least 5 people, and they tended their victims were drifters or hobos. Basically, nobody would know they were missing types, and that's how they were able to do it. It is believed that there are actually 7 other bodies or 7 other people that they had killed, but they couldn't find any bodies to connect them. So they couldn't try them for it. And what I thought was even creepier, that they would take the clothing from their victims and make a winter quilt to cuddle with in the winter. Like, that's their trophy. You watch the CSI and NCIS and all those other shows, and when they talk about serial killers, there was always a trophy, but it was always something strange, like an ear or teeth or something weird. No, these people would take the clothes and make a blanket. So yeah, if you ever end up at somebody's house and they give you a quilt and it's made of jeans and flannel, run. So basically, their killing spree took place between October of 1986 to May of 1989. Now, they didn't just go from wholesome to murderous overnight. Ray did have a long history of crimes, but things like petty theft, grand larceny, I believe he was convicted of writing bad checks, stuff like that. Nothing too out there, but he still wasn't like Mr. Rogers. And one day, Ray came up with this brilliant idea that he would hire drifters and to work. So basically, they lived on a farm, or they had a farm, and he would hire these drifters that they found in town or walking down the street, and promise them, pay, or a place to live or something. And what he would do is have them go to the animal auctions and bid on cattle and write a bad check and bring the animals back. And then at that point, Ray didn't need them anymore, and he didn't want the bad checks to come back to him. So one shot to the back of the head, and his problem was gone. And he would bury them on their farm. Sure, he had lots of property. So one day, Ray is out with one of his employees, and they got the cattle. They come back, and he doesn't have a need for him anymore, so he goes to shoot him. However, this guy gets away and runs through the woods and actually stumbles across what looks to be like a skull, a human skull. So this guy basically hightails it out of there, see you later, and calls Crime Stoppers for that area and gives them an anonymous tip basically saying, listen, if you go to this farm, there is a skull and bones of people, gotta go. Click, and he's gone. So the police came. And they searched the land and found human remains. Of course, all the skulls they found had a bullet hole in the back of the head, so it fit, and I believe it was like a 22 gauge shotgun that was what the bullets they found, and when they went in the house, that's what was in the house. So, obviously, the Copelands are arrested and they're charged with murder. The lawyer that the couple had tried to claim that Faye had no idea any of this was going on, that her husband was abusive, she had battered wife syndrome, and no clue that there were people being shot in the yard. Um, no one believed it, though. So, what they ended up finding was a list of employees, and next to a few employees was a red X. And the list was written in Faye's name as well as the X's. So you're going to tell me you have no clue where, like, what these hobos are just up and quitting. So you mark out of your, oh, look, this person's gone, let me put an X. To me, you knew they were getting shot. You crossed them off your list. That list actually came in handy when they were trying to identify the bodies. They were able to use the list to figure out who was who. And it all corresponded with her X's. And the other thing, too, let's not forget the clothing quilt. Wouldn't you question where the hell all these clothes are coming from? And, all right, it's crazy that you're making a quilt out of them, but that could be your own crazy thing. You would still question, like, where the hell did you get a bag of clothes? And every couple weeks, suddenly you have a bag of clothes? Come on, you're not the Goodwill. Let's be realistic. So that really didn't work out, that she didn't know anything, so they still tried her as if she did know. Ray attempted to go for the insanity plea, and that fell apart. So then he tried to offer like a work with them and get a plea deal. That didn't work. That the police department and the courts were so fed up with this dude and everything he was doing that they were like, no, we're not going to offer you a deal, and stuck with the first degree murder charges that they were being charged in court. So I'm sure, as you guessed, with all the evidence that there was, they were found guilty. In fact, Faye and Ray were both sentenced to death by lethal injection, making them truly the oldest couple to receive this sentence. However, they would never actually be executed by the state. Faye was 69 at the time of being convicted, and Ray was 76. So Ray actually did die on death row of natural causes. I believe he was in jail for a short time and ended up in the infirmary, and that's where he passed away. Faye's sentence was actually changed to life in prison. However, in 2002, she was released to a nursing home due to her declining health, and they did not have what she needed in a prison, so they sent her to a nursing home. And in 2003, at the age of 83, Faye did pass away. So they didn't live very long. Well, I mean, she lived a decent amount in prison, but yeah, they were the oldest serial killers, oldest to be convicted for the death penalty. And that is what they did with their retirement. They killed people and tried to screw the system. So when you're ready to retire, there are options. You could play golf and move to Florida, or you can kill hobos and try and break their record. So that is the story of Ray and Faye Copeland, Grandma and Grandpa serial killer. So, speaking of murder trials, I saw another story about a very interesting, unique murder trial that I couldn't help but want to share. This one sets the stage back to 1921 in San Francisco. The defendant is accused of 14 counts of murder. They say he butchers his victims in broad daylight. Now, this is a psychotic serial killer. And the psychotic serial killer we are talking about is a pure breed Airedale. That's right, a dog. A dog is on trial for killing 14 neighborhood cats. And the way he got to being on trial, which is totally insane, is basically he was going through the neighborhood one day and broke into the backyard of a woman named Marjorie who had a cat named Sunbeam. who happened to be in the yard with her kittens. Unfortunately, the Airedale got in and ransacked where the kittens were before turning on to Sunbeam, and Sunbeam and the kittens do fall victim to the Airedale's crazy-ass rampage. So Marjorie, being a good pet owner and living in a, I'm sure, of HOA-type community back then, decided to call a neighborhood meeting and have the owner of the dog come, and, basically everyone was like, listen, your dog is killing cats, 14. We've got witnesses, many, many witnesses. You need to either put your dog down or you're going to, face legal action. Of course, the dog owner, who it says in the story is like this pompous ass used car dealer, fits the stereotype as they read it, basically is like, listen, I registered my dog, he's got a license, he can roam and do anything he pleases, and he's doing it on his own accord, which means I'm not held responsible for anything this dog does. Of course, the people didn't want to hear that, and back then, the owner, if the people could prove that you had a vicious, dangerous animal, you would be charged with a crime. So the owner of the dog is charged with a misdemeanor. This, of course, infuriates him, pisses him off, and out of pure principle, decides he's going to fight it. And he's going to fight it the best way he knows how. He hires a lawyer. So, probably the best ambulance-chasing lawyer in town, I'm sure of it. And when they go to appear in court, instead of saying, listen, the owner takes responsibility for the dog, that is not what happens. This lawyer says, no, I want a trial by jury, and it would only be fair if the dog has a jury of his peers, which would mean 12 dog jurors. Of course, the judge thinks this guy is batshit crazy and says, I'll grant you your trial, but there will be 12 human jurors of his peers. Of course. I mean, really? Isn't that Lady and Tramp? We're not going to have freaking dog jurors. How are you going to know anything they're even saying? And they're just going to be sniffing each other's butts the whole time. But, I digress. So, this goes to trial. There is an actual trial for this dog. It starts December 21st of 1921, and it's a zoo, for lack of a better term. They're bringing in regular human witnesses. They're bringing in dogs and all kinds of things to try and identify, well, is this the dog you saw? Everything backfires. I mean, everything out of all the witnesses point to the dog, say, listen, this is the menace of our neighborhood. He's killing the cats, blah, blah, blah. And after a month-long trial, that's right, this dog got a month-long trial. There are humans who kill other humans who don't go on trial for a month. But the dog did. And after that month, the jury went and voted. And they came back with a 11-1, stating that the dog should be freed. As you know, it is not unanimous, so the lawyer, of course, says, it's 11-1. I want a mistrial. And it's granted. I think the judge was just sick of the whole freaking crazy-ass circus. Grants the dog freedom. The Airedale is free to go and terrorize the neighborhood. I'm sure Marjorie was pissed off, all Karen mode, and I'm sure all the neighborhood cats became indoor cats at that time, just to keep them safe. And don't get me wrong, I love dogs, I love cats, all animals. And I could tell you, I have 2 dogs, and if we still had trials for misbehaving animals, I'd probably have already been to court with my dogs because of disturbing the peace. They are forever barking at anything that passes my house that even people can't see. Like, I think I must have 1,000 ghosts outside my house because they're constantly barking and there's no one there. It is what it is. So, what I did actually find to be interesting of this crazy-ass trial is animal trials are not uncommon. Probably more uncommon these days, but back in the Middle Ages, it was incredibly common to have a trial for an animal. Basically, they would hold animals accountable for breaking human laws. To me, that seems incredibly unfair. How do you explain to an animal what they're doing? I mean, I can look at my dogs, tell them anything I want, they turn their heads, but all they hear is like the Peanuts teacher that goes wah wah wah. That is all they're hearing. And the only other word they hear is, "Oh, you want me to go pee on something in your house." So holding them accountable is just asinine. But back in the Middle Ages, they would hold anything from dogs, horses, eels, birds, donkeys accountable for any laws that were broken. There was another quick story, too, that I read about a trial for a donkey. Basically, the donkey was being charged with bestiality, and that it was the donkey's fault. I guess the donkey maybe made a pass at his owner, and, sexy donkey eyes, and the guy just fell for it. But being a responsible owner, he went, to be a witness for the donkey and was like, "Listen, my donkey didn't do anything wrong," whatever he said. And the jury or the court was like, "You know what? We're going to let the donkey go. It isn't the donkey's fault." However, they turned around and charged the owner with bestiality. In the Middle Ages, I'm sure the punishment was probably severe and horrific. So that'll teach you to not do inappropriate things with donkeys that are going to court. And I have one more super interesting, different, unique Discovery Channel type story for you. Basically, it's about hanging coffins. It was something they did way back, mainly in China and the Philippines, and more so when there were tribes and villages and whatnot. And in China, basically, they would have these wooden coffins they would build out of one piece of wood, and they said they would hang them to prevent the bodies from being attacked by what they refer to as the beasts. I'm going to assume it's wild animals. And to bless their soul eternally. They believed, I believe it was the Bo people of southern China, that they would view the mountain cliffs as a stairway to heaven. So they felt if they put their dead in coffins on these cliffs, they were helping them climb the stairway to heaven. So when they passed, they had a shorter distance to travel. Pretty simple, but, it's a nice send-off for their people. However, in the Philippines, similar, but slightly different. They also believed that if they put their dead on these cliffs, it was easier for them to move on. They were closer to heaven. The reasoning that these villages and whatnot would do it was the elderly actually feared being buried in the ground. They feared that when the rains would come and it would seep into the soil, that their bodies would rot quickly, and they didn't want that. So they would request to be put on the cliffs in the mountains where the rains couldn't really cause them to rot. But of course, they had more of a tradition to it. So they would basically place the person inside these much smaller than we know coffins in the fetal position. Their belief was you would leave this world the same way you came into it, in the fetal position. Traditionally, when someone would die in these villages in the Philippines, if you were wealthy, they would butcher 5 animals, a mix of chickens and pigs. If you were not as wealthy, they would only butcher 3. But the denomination on their traditions, it would either had to be 3 or 5. And they would take the corpses and put them in a wooden chair, which they referred to as a death chair, tied the body to the chair with vines, cover them with a blanket, and face them towards the main door of the house. This way, when the relatives and anybody in the village wanted to pay their respects, they could just walk past the house. It must be where modern day wakes come from. I mean, it's not as barbaric sounding. No one's tied to a chair and in a house, which would be super creepy. We have funeral homes these days. But they would also smoke the bodies, so it would slow down decomposition as well as mask the smell. I have personally never been to the Philippines, but what I do know of it is hot, which would make the smell of death ripe. So I guess the smoking was a good idea. Um, and then after a few days, they would remove them from the chair and they would begin their way to the mountain to put them in their coffin and whatnot. So the mourners would do their very best as they're carrying their loved one up. Is they would try and grab at them and carry them so that their blood would get on them, because they believed that if the blood of the person who has passed is on you, that it's good luck, and that their knowledge and their skills would seep into you, and you would be able to carry on what they knew. So it's the idea of passing information down via fluids. Honestly, when I read that, all I could think about is like when you're talking to someone and they're just a little too close and they have that little bit of spit on their lip and it comes off and it lands on you and you can't make a big deal of it and you can't wipe it off, but it's all you could think. You're not even listening to anything they're saying. Well, now imagine blood. Oh, no freaking way. No. Yeah, it's a sweet tradition. Totally understand it, but not in a million years would I be carrying dead people. So basically, they'd get to up in the mountain to the cliffs where this person would be going into their coffin, and they would put them in the fetal position, tie them with vines, wrap them with a blanket, and put them in these small coffins. And that was their tradition for their elders. Honestly, I'm sure there's probably still small villages there that do it, but all the younger people, they do have adopted more modern or Christian beliefs, and they use the cemeteries and headstones and whatnot. But you can go to China and the Philippines and go on a hike and look up and see a dozen or more coffins hanging. Some of them with writing on them. Some of them from the pictures I saw, they look like they were falling apart. I mean, really, these are wooden coffins. So eventually the elements are going to beat them up. I would not want to be underneath them to what may come out of them. But, no. I do think these tribe or community rituals from back in the day that are no longer practiced are very interesting. They did things very differently than we do them now for whatever reason, whether it's religious beliefs or we're just more modern. But I think they're super interesting, and they always are good to talk about, just to educate people. You know, who would know? If we're not from the Philippines, you're not going to have a clue. And if you ever go on a trip and see a bunch of coffins hanging, now it won't freak you out as much, thinking like the Blair Witch is going to come get you in the night. So, you're welcome. All right, I lied. I said that was the last thing I was going to tell you, but I will tell you one more story, more of a personal note. So, one of my reasons for doing this podcast is I am fascinated by the paranormal. I won't lie, it totally kind of creeps me out a little bit. At the same time, I enjoy watching anything about it, reading anything about it, and getting information from anywhere. I can tell you back when I was probably somewhere 21, 22, I went to a friend's house, and there was a whole group of us hanging out, and we, we're smart-ass 20-year-olds. Oh, we know everything there is to know. So we went to Toys R Us, and we went to the game section. And what's in the game section of Toys R Us? But a Ouija board. So, this will be fun. No one believes any of it, so let's buy the Ouija board, take it back to their apartment, and we're all hanging out and goofing off and making fun of everything. Whip it out, and I'm telling you, it's plastic. Parker Brothers makes it. What could possibly be scary about this? Back then, it was before a lot of the horror movies and whatnot, and the internet wasn't super popular, so all the warnings weren't out there, all the stories weren't out there. So we set it up on the table, we light a candle, like it tells you, and I think there was about 8 of us there, and we all put our fingers on the little planchette, and we're just, asking random questions. And all of a sudden, it starts to move. And everyone is like, well, I'm not moving it. You moving it? Oh, you must be moving it. Blah, blah, blah. And everyone is now like, no, I'm not moving it. And we lift our fingers off of it, and it continues to move. Let me tell you, 8 young adults in a basement apartment run up those stairs. I mean, if this was the Olympics, we all would have qualified for medals. And out the door we went. And they had this little tiny porch, I don't know, 4x4 porch. And we're all standing on the porch. No one will go back in the basement. Totally freaked out that this happened. And we're like, oh my God, I can't believe it worked. And now you've got fear and curiosity. So we're like, well, what the hell do we do now? A lot of pep talks of, all right, we're going to go back in and we're going to figure out, what's going on. Obviously it moved. It's got something to tell us. So now, the adrenaline's pumping. So we go back down and we set it back up and we're back on it and it's moving. And so this was in New York, and I don't know what other states you may find them, but houses up there tend to have basements. And this was and they were always converted into apartments, usually illegal apartments. And so we're in the basement apartment, and it's asking for the son of the landlord. Now, he's a little younger than we are, but he has come down, he's hung out with all of us, so we know who he is. And so we're like, all right, well, it's asking for him, we got to get him. So somebody volunteers and goes and knocks on the door and says, I don't remember his name, you got to come downstairs. So he does, and he sees the Ouija board, and we're explaining what is going on, and totally freaked him out. And it's saying it's his brother and all this stuff. And he's like, I don't have a brother. I don't know what the hell this is talking about. And it gives him some information, and it spells out a name and what happened. And then the night ends. We, put it away, and we're like, all right, so we'll come back tomorrow. You tell the kid to talk to his mom and explain, what went on. So he does it. So we come back the next day, and he comes down, and we're all waiting anxiously. And he tells us that before he was born, his mother had another son who had died. I believe he got sick. I don't know what it was, but he had passed away as a baby before he was even born. And this was his name, and everything that he was told, it was all true. So he was totally freaked out, and, so were we, that this actually happened. And we never used the Ouija board again. Like, it was reassuring that what it told us all was true, but creeped us out enough to never ever want to test it again. So I believe somebody else's mother or mother-in-law was like, oh no, like that thing is, she ended up telling us how bad they are, and things can come through that you really don't want them to, and ended up, I don't remember if they burned it or buried it upside down in the backyard, but essentially they got rid of it and it was never seen again. And that was the first and last time I ever touched a Ouija board. And I will remember that day like it was yesterday. But my point to this totally crazy story is that it unlocked the want to know things about paranormal. That the belief that we aren't alone, that you don't die and that's, the end of it. And there are people who are skeptic, and I don't believe that everything is haunted, and I believe that you have to prove it. I'm not going to believe that every knock in the night is a ghost. No, your house settles and cracks, and but I can tell you, if I wake up at 3:33 at night, I will pretend to be asleep, because I am not going to be a victim of a demon. So that is the start of my interest in the paranormal. And then, kind of grew from there. Then if we fast forward, let's see, now 10 plus years, I finally decided it was time to leave New York. And myself and my now wife, we moved to Carrollton, Georgia from New York. Not only was it like an extreme culture shock from being from New York to a very slow moving town, but it was a dry county. So you can only get alcohol in very limited places, and it would probably be the most expensive drink you would ever buy. However, the house was cheap and it was big, and I got a lot of land. And we were just done with New York, so we went for it. In hindsight, yeah, we probably should have done more research, but it is what it is, and it was a year and a half of something I wouldn't change. However, what we did find out is the area that we lived in, Carrollton, had many battles in the Civil War, and the house was super creepy from time to time. And I don't mean like it was old and creaky. It was a brand new house. No one ever lived there before. But I guess whatever had gone on in the area maybe just stuck with the land. And I'm not talking like weird ass poltergeist, but we had weird things happen in the house. I was home one day and I went in the kitchen and all the cabinet doors are open, the stove is open, and I'm like, well, this is kind of freaky. So I closed them, and I talked myself into thinking it's nothing. I opened them, gotta close them. I don't know. And I leave the room and I go do some other stuff, and I go back in the kitchen and they're all open again. So I close them again and decide to call my wife, and I'm like, you need to come home because this shit keeps opening and I am just over it. And I think I spent like 2 hours sitting outside waiting for someone to come home because it just totally freaked me out. And so the house was like a split plan. It was a 2-story house, and the master bedroom was on one side of the house, and then the living room, and then a hall where the other bedrooms were. And I don't care if it was broad daylight, I don't care if it was nighttime, if you were walking towards anywhere. So let's say you walked from the living room, you were going to go down the front stairs. If you ever looked down that hallway where the other bedrooms were, in the first doorway where the first bedroom was, it always, for a second, you would see like a dark figure standing in the doorway, but looking out at you. Used to freak me the fuck out. Every time, and I'd be like, do you see him? And my wife would always tell me no. I think she did see him, but wouldn't tell me the truth. I was over this house so fast, I was freaking done with it. So we met these people, and they lived in the area, and it was this woman, and she had a girlfriend who was, I think she in like basic training, so like when you start in the military. So we didn't meet her right away, but the one we met, we were good friends, we hung out, had a good time. And then the girlfriend comes home, and she has bad juju. She is very arrogant, and I'm not saying arrogant is bad, but there's good arrogant and bad arrogant. And she would walk around and like come in my house like who the fuck she was. And I'm like, dude, this girl's, she's a fucking bitch. But, whatever. And then suddenly, one night or one afternoon, we had a picture on our bedroom, like a mirror on the dresser, and it was me and my wife, and above us was a picture of our friend and her girlfriend. And all of a sudden the picture slides out of the, like where it's tucked in, slides out, flips over on the mirror, and tucks itself back in underneath our photo. If I wasn't standing there to watch it do it, I would tell you were a liar. I was like, holy shit, did you see that? And my wife's like, yeah. And I'm like, dude, that's creepy. That's not supposed to happen by itself. It could fall off a mirror, but it can't swing back around and tuck itself back in. And as we're having this conversation about this picture, another friend who knows them comes to the house, comes in the front door, and she had happened to have strokes. She had a bunch of mini strokes, and she could see people's auras, which I find to be interesting all in itself. But she walks in and she grabs the banister, and she's like, oh my God, what's going on in this house? She's like, I feel like it's so dark, and like, she goes, the colors are black and like a pea army green. And we're like, this is just, we tell her what happens with the picture. Deadpan looks at us and goes, we need to get that picture out of your house. it's something with the picture. It has something to do with this chick. And okay, trust me, I know this sounds like totally fucked up. I totally get it. And if I wasn't there to see it all happen, I'd be like, you're batshit crazy. But it really did happen. So we're like, fine. We take the picture out, and we're like, well, what the fuck do we do with it? They come up, my wife and her come up with this idea. We're going to bury it in the backyard. So, like crazy-ass neighbors, we go out there with shovels, big shovels. And it was, they cleared a bunch of land, and then I had like some trees towards the end of the property line. So we took it where the trees were, and we started digging a hole, and we put the photo in face down. So it's upside down in the hole. And we put something else in it, but I can't remember what. I don't know. And we squirted it with holy water, because, listen, I'm Catholic. I have holy water everywhere. And all of a sudden, it went from being like a super bright, sunny day to these dark clouds come out of nowhere. And this thunder, it never rained, but this thunder comes, so we fill in the hole real quick, because now we think it's going to rain. And we bury the picture and bless the hole, and we go in the house. And all of a sudden, the sky cleared up. The house smells like roses, and I can even smell it, and I can't smell shit. And I'm like, this is just fucking crazy. I'm like, we need to really consider if we truly want to stay here. I think we were so freaked out by the whole crazy-ass incident. We came down to Florida for a long weekend just to get away from the scary house. And we were like, listen, we're going to move to Florida. We had family that was thinking of coming back down to Florida full-time. We had an opportunity to get a townhouse down here, and we were like, we're putting that fucking crazy-ass house up for sale and getting the hell out of Dodge. And that's what we did. We actually put the house up for sale. We still had problems with the freaking house, just trying to get rid of it. And we've been in Florida ever since. So I've definitely had my own crazy paranormal experiences that have truly interested me in the whole thing. I was part of a paranormal group. It was a short thing, and I would love to do it again. Unfortunately, I don't have time enough to do it, hence why I'm doing a podcast instead. So I definitely will do a lot of paranormal type stories as we go forward, and also true crime. That's going to be the bulk of what I do. So I definitely hope that you go on this journey with me and you find these interesting. Yeah, there'll be some times where I'll do these stories that are just weird, interesting facts, like the dog trial or the hanging coffins. I mean, it's fun to learn something new, and that is creepy enough to want to learn. So please keep sticking with me. Send me your feedback. Ask me questions. Give me suggestions on stories. You can email me, the Dark Cellar Podcast at gmail.com. You can find me on Instagram, the Dark Cellar Podcast. I'm going to put some pictures up of the dog that was put on trial. I will put pictures up of the hanging coffins in case anyone's interested in seeing what they look like. And we'll even put pictures up of our old couple serial killers who went from loving grandparents to crazy-ass murderers. I do hope you come back and listen some more. And really, anytime, reach out. I'm really interested to hear from everybody. Thanks so much. Bye-bye.